Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session where I will demonstrate you how I made my managers happy using Azure DevOps. And hopefully you will be able to take some of the tips and tricks that I'm sharing today with you to make your managers happy as well into your organization. But before we get started, I want to share and say a huge thank you to all the sponsors and also to the Scottish Summit that are making the event possible. They are all great and the event is amazing. So I wanted to say again, a huge thank you to all of them. My name is Matteo Tumiati. I work as a senior DevOps engineer in a company called iCubed. We are based in Italy and I'm doing consultancy regarding DevOps in some of the larger enterprises. And the experience that I'm showing today is based on one of those customers that has more than 100,000 employees around the world. But let's dive into the agenda for today because the topic is quite big. I have plenty of slides to show you what I did there and the amazing transformation that we had. So yeah, here are 4 points. I know these are all bold statements, but I want you to remember that you need to simplify your life as much as possible. You need to be able to work in a safe and happy environment as you can with a perfect team. And you need to be able to explain why production is not working, which is the most interesting part, but also the most difficult one some of the times. So let's try to start from there. But yeah, before going into it, I would like to speak a little bit on who is a manager, because sometimes this is misleading. Actually, if you take the dictionary and you start looking into it, the word manager means that it refers to someone that administers and holds responsibility with decision-making powers onto something. So I take a look at Azure DevOps in general and all the people participating in our team. And I said, okay, who is a manager here? Well, of course, there are managers wearing suits, as always. These are probably the ones responsible for delivery of the product, of the quality also of the product. They are also in touch with the customers and so on. And then we have, of course, the development team, because the development team is responsible for the development of the product. And then I know this is probably not 100% right, because if you're working with Agile, Scrum, or Safe, or whatsoever, this is not really true. But let's take for granted that the Scrum Master and the product owner are also responsible for the backlog. Why is this important? You will see that in a while, because we have created chapters to look into each of these topics so that we have tips and tricks to apply to each one of them. Okay, so I think we can really get started with what I would like to share with you. But I need to start with a sad story. And this is something that really happened to me when I started this enterprise a long time ago. More than 2 or 3 years ago or something like that. And since then, we have improved a lot. So let me share you where we started. First, DevOps wasn't even a word. Nobody in the team really knew what DevOps was about. We were part of this organization where we needed to work on a proof of concept. Nobody really wanted to ship anything at that time. There were just 5 people working on that. Again, remember, it was a POC, so we simply wanted to test some web APIs and the front end. So we simply created everything from scratch in Visual Studio, classic build and release, nothing fancy. We had an environment in Azure using app services. Again, nothing really complicated. There were no tests. It was a POC. Again, everything worked on developer's machine. And then, well, the first customer came in and we said, okay, they are buying from this product. Nobody really knew it was a product again. But managers said, okay, we need to deliver what we did to this customer. And we did the deployment in production, and here's what happened. I'm sorry the screenshot is quite blurred, but this is really coming from Application Insight and our telemetry back then. But as you can see, the number of crashes went skyrocketing. Um, this really amazed me when I saw it, and we needed to start investigating on what happened. And we said, okay, let's try to see what's the configuration in Azure, because maybe we missed something. Yeah, I can tell you that we really missed a lot of things that time. First thing is that we noticed there was unrestricted FTP access on Azure App Services. So everyone on the team could have access it and change the source code without anybody else know. The application was compiled in debug, which was quite strange, but it was there, so we needed to deal with it. For sure, there was some mistake here and there, but we really wanted to understand why it was not working rather than understanding why it was compiled in debug mode. But well, that's another story. So we said, okay, what can we do next? Next is that I want to download all the DLLs that are deployed there, and I want to retrieve the build number so that based on the build number, I can go back into my Git history and search for the commit or the tag that corresponds to the same build number that I just deployed. And I'm sorry the screenshot is in Italian, but I think you can all understand that the version applied to that DLL was 1.0. And again, this was not really strange. We didn't really know anything about versioning back then. So we were continuously deploying things from Visual Studio. There was no DevOps or whatsoever, but we really missed on this one. So you know what? We started digging again and again. We took ELSpy to disassemble all the DLLs. We manually researched a lot of commits, more than 100 for sure. And a week later, after the customer was in production, we deployed a new version that was really working and solving all the crashes that we had. And you know what happened? Because this is really crazy. Well, you can't have production errors if you never ship. And this story is quite true, because what we noticed is that on that customer, we deployed a debug version of 3 months before or something like that. We simply copied the wrong staging slot in Azure from the test customer and the production one. And there was a lot of emails going on saying, hey, we need to deploy, we need to deploy, we need to deploy, but nobody really clicked the button to perform the deployment. In this case, yeah, we had a lot of issues without the deployment. So this is the proof that this meme is wrong. But yeah, we said, what can we do next? And we said, okay, we need to have DevOps in place. This is a really nice phrase from Donovan Brown working at Microsoft, where it says DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And we were not delivering anything. There was nothing in production for that specific customer. There was probably no process. Everything was really confusing. The product was confusing. People were confused. We were not really delivering anything. And we said, okay, DevOps seems quite good. This is from the DORA report of 2018, so 2 years back when we started looking into it. We said, okay, if we apply DevOps, these are some of the numbers that we can get. It seems quite nice, so what can we do? Or what should we do in practice? We started categorizing things. So we said, okay, probably we need to manage infrastructure in some way. So instead of doing Azure, click on add new resource, select the type, for example, app services, and perform the deployment, adding manual parameters and so on. Probably we need infrastructure as code. Probably we need policy as code as well. And talking about release management, well, we need to have a way to understand if we have enough capacity or if we need to scale in some way. And if something goes wrong, we need to be able to recover everything and have an automatic rollback, or maybe perform a roll forward strategy only. The same applies to configuration management. You probably heard a lot about feature flags or feature toggles, automated environment provisioning and deprovisioning, self-service environment where I can test my changes before they go into production, but with a real environment in my hand. And then regarding testing, of course, you need to automate testing as much as possible because you have no time with DevOps, given the faster delivery times, to perform manual testing. Of course, this is still a practice somewhere in the product, but we need to minimize that as much as possible. We need to understand what's happening in production. We need to be able to do what is called hypothesis-driven development. I need to test in production. I need to start forcing services to fail so that I can prove that also my recovery techniques are working. And then, of course, there are common things. And this is where we started, because these are more complicated and there is no way you can implement all of these from scratch in just 1 month of work or something like that. There is really a lot behind it. And the bigger the product, the more complicated it will be. So just start from the basics, I would say. So if you have a product and you want to build and ship it, let's start from there. Let's write the pipelines for continuous integration, continuous deployment, and release management. So let's start from there. I need to give you some numbers before we get started, though, on where we started and where we are today, so that you have a clear picture of what happened. So we started at 5 people at the very beginning. Today, we are 70 members in the team. We have real management people, really people wearing suits all the time in the team. We are based in 3 different locations and in 2 different time zones. And we have 4 teams of more or less 10 people each. Someone is a little bit bigger, some are a little bit smaller, but we have people specialized in front end, in mobile, in back end, and in data and analytics. And right now, using everything you saw, we are able to perform 60 deployments per day, all successful. Sometimes there are failures, but it is okay because it means we are able to catch things that are not quite working as we expect to. But we have everything automated. I can give you numbers on the number of tests that we do per day, the number of tests that are successful per day, the number of pull requests that are closed per month, and the number of commits or whatever. I don't really care about those numbers. I care about the number of successful deployments and the value that I bring to my customers. So I don't really have metrics on all of these things. These are just numbers that I got out just to show you where we are today, given where we started and the sad story that I shared, because I understand that some of you may be in the same spot. Talking about the context and what Donovan Brown shared in that phrase, well, we need to start digging into people, process, and tools. People are the most complicated part, for sure. You can see the picture there, what I learned from group projects, and probably the biggest piece of that cake is how much I hate people. You know, these things is related to mindset most of the time, because it's hard to apply changes there. If I'm used to work in a certain way, breaking that box and going out of the comfort zone is really complicated. Start using something new is complicated. And it's not just a matter of using a different tool, because the tool are the easiest part. You can take a tool, and if it doesn't work, I mean, it's just probably a Docker container. So you dispose the container, you throw it away, and then you pull in another Docker container or something like that. We are not really interested in having tools that works forever. But people are here to stay and do the best they can do with our system. And process is a little bit in between. It's not really easy because you need to think on how to achieve it. And it involves people and especially real management, which is the most complicated part again, because most of the time they are not really working and they are not quite aligned with what development team is doing. Probably they are not using Agile while the team is using Agile or something like that. So we need to focus on some of those things. Honestly, in this part of the presentation, I'm not going to talk about people because it will take probably an entire week just to discuss that. And there are people that are way more confident and secure to talk about these topics than I am. So I will just simply talk about the process and tools here. Okay, where do we start? Just as a reminder, we didn't really have anything. We just had a Git repo somewhere. And we said, okay, let's use a software that we can all understand, which is Microsoft based, and that can make sure we can create all the things that we discussed, the best practices that I just showed. And we said, okay, Azure DevOps is the one that works for us. We have the boards where we can manage our backlog. We have pipelines to automate all the things. We have our Git repository. We have a separated section dedicated to test plan and so on. Okay, so where do we start? And said, okay, let's start from the backlog management, because this is where you start the day. You take some work items there and you do the job. So first, Scrum Masters and Program Manager, they are the ones responsible for the backlog. So, or at least this is what I'm assuming right now. I know, again, it's not 100% true, but let's assume it is. They were complaining a lot because some of the user stories were really created with just a title, because we had a team of developers that was growing and growing from 5 to 70. We had an impressive amount of work that we needed to take care of, and there was a lot of bugs that we were creating because everything started from a POC and we needed to make things pixel perfect. So whenever we noticed something new, we said, okay, let's create an item in the backlog. I will refine that later. So I was just creating a new user story with the title and so on, stop. But unfortunately, due to time, due to business priorities and so on, we never did a backlog refinement meeting. And then when we started looking at things, it was really complicated to understand what those things were about with just a title. And for bugs, we never had repro steps. We never had a build identifier to let me understand where the bug was, so that I could clone that environment and dig into it to reproduce the bug. So we said, okay, first, we probably need to talk with Scrum Masters and product owners to fix this, because this is probably not the good way to work. But other than that, if we want to talk about the tools, you can go in Azure DevOps and add custom fields and validation rules. So in this case, you can see that when our work item is moved from whatever state into dev in progress, I want to make sure that we have specified an effort in terms of story point, an acceptance criteria, and an assign to. Because I want people to start assigning things to themselves. I want developers to make sure they know what is the required effort and so on. And then styling rules. Styling rules are important as well. In this case, it was very hard to identify high priority issue. So I said, what can we do with that? We have a lot of bugs, but where do I start first? Which is the one with highest priority that I need to take care of immediately? I said, okay, again, first talk with Scrum Masters and product owners. They probably know where to start. And then start investigating into how to use the priority field into the work item, into the bug or whatsoever, and then apply the states. This is another very interesting thing in Azure DevOps. So you can go to the styling rules in Azure DevOps from your backlog and apply the rules to whatever field you want. So in this case, from the picture, you can see that I applied the style red whenever the work items are stale, meaning that work item type are task or can be bugs or whatever work item. And then the change date is less than 5 days ago. Sorry, more than 5 days ago. And then when you look at the backlog, you will see different colors. Please do not exaggerate with this one. Otherwise, you will have difficulties in understanding how the backlog works. And also be careful with colors, because you may have color-blinded people working in your team. So be sure everyone understands the rules that you are applying here. And now we have the backlog ordered in some way. We have work items that are organized, that have rules for validation and rules for styling, but there was also other issues. Developers usually forget to change work item states. They start working on something because they have it in their mind, but they forget to change the things in the backlog. Um, this means that Scrum Masters and product owners are always upset because they do not know who is working on what, and it's also impossible to predict whatever activities will be done within the sprint or outside of the sprint, whether we are late or not. Again, talk with your team to understand that. But if you look at the product, in our case, we were looking for required state that were missing. So we added those states. In this case, for example, we decided to not have committed anymore, but we changed it in ready for development after the backlog refinement meeting, for example, and ready for sprint in order to make sure that things are ready, and then dev in progress when we start working on something, and then pending PR approval when we create the pull requests. This gave the sense of control over the backlog to Scrum Masters and PO. So they wanted to have something like this. But again, if developers were a bit lazy to change the state before, how will they change state now, given we have even more states? Well, the thing is that we try to automate most of the things as possible. So there are Azure REST API, Azure DevOps REST API you can invoke to change work item state. So in this case, I create a custom PowerShell script that is really basic. It is simply calling this REST API based on a custom condition to apply the determined state. Of course, developers will still need to, for example, change the work item to state in progress, because the system cannot really understand when you started working on something on your local machine. But when you create a pull request, for example, the branch policy associated to that can change the state of the work items associated to that to pending PR approval. And when instead the pull request is merged, based again on custom condition, like you can see there, you can change the state to, you can check the state, meaning am I in a pull request context or not? In this case, PR approved, which means I'm in a continuous integration context. The variable called build.reason is set to individual CI or batched CI. And in this case, all the associated work item will be changed into state PR approved. It may sound complex, but in the end, it's all a matter of process. You need to understand what you need, and then you have the tools accomplishing those things. Regarding also the backlog, we had another thing, which was about querying work items. We had issues in understanding what was being released, calculating the release notes between two versions, probably because we were not releasing fast enough. We were just getting started again. We had many work items to correlate and so on. So we talked with developers in order to make sure we could faster create releases faster and faster and faster. And also we splitted work items, creating more work items type, again, in Azure DevOps, so that we could have different work items associated to activities that are customer related and activities that are product related. This way, we could also do some queries in Azure DevOps to understand what was released to a certain customer that was not released to another one, or that are related to a specific product. So this is it basically for what regards the backlog. And I will need now to talk about development. And this is where the magic gets created from the team. So you're probably already familiar with branch policies. Branch policies are a way to secure your source code from unwanted commits. You probably heard a lot of things saying do not release on a Friday because you have no people checking deployments on the weekend in case something goes wrong, or do not commit because we are releasing, we have to freeze the solution or something like that. And these are a way to force the creation of pull requests. There must be some sort of code validation, code review. We need to have people checking what is being changed in the product so that we can track also activities. This is correlated to activities in the backlog, so you have full traceability end-to-end from where you create the work item when the developers start working on it, because we have validation rules, and then when things are merged, so that you remember we have work items that are changing state automatically and so on. But if you really need to bypass policy, well, you can bypass those. So this can be done by setting dedicated permissions. Usually, I do not assign those permissions to someone specific or maybe to the entire team I'm working with. Maybe I assign this to the project collection build service account, and that's because this is a machine, and probably the machine, I am the one using that machine, that specific agent to compile. So probably I am the one writing the rules to bypass it. So be careful with that, because this is something you can do, but you can also cause unwanted things to be merged if you are not careful enough. Things can be bypassed via REST APIs or using the CLI if you want, or otherwise, if you need to bypass all the time, I think you can use optional policies, which are policies that are not really blocking the pull request to get merged. How do I do that? Well, the Azure DevOps CLI is a CLI based on the Azure CLI that can give you the possibility to automate all the things from the board to repos, pipelines, artifacts, and so on. If you do not have those things in place, because there are no, for example, if you need to interact with something specific for a specific pipeline to understand if it is running and in which stage this is running, well, you can call the REST API for that. So there is a command called AZ-REST. You can call that. This is based on the Azure CLI, and you will have the access to all the Azure organization that you're running on. And of course, if you want, you can create custom policies because Azure DevOps provide a set of policies you can add to your pull request. So for example, some build pipelines, you can enforce traceability where you require some work items to be added there. You can add the team members to do some code review and so on, but you can also create custom ones. For example, to ensure that people are creating branches with a certain name or whatsoever, that they are targeting the right branch, for example. So this is really a neat feature that Azure DevOps added, so you can extend the product to whatever you need. You simply need to write, for example, an Azure function. If you use PowerShell, you can also take advantage of the Azure CLI to write whatever you need and interact with Azure DevOps. And then in the end, once the Azure function, for example, is published, you can simply create a new webhook resource in Azure DevOps and paste in the link of your Azure function, and then you're done. Other than that, we have the source code, we have pull requests, but then the code is merged and we need to start versioning it. But versioning is really complicated. This is not something easy at all. We may have to deal with different versions. So for example, API versioning of the DLLs that we are producing. And then we have to understand if the product that we have is the same thing as the business thinks of the product. How many numbers should I use as versioning? And then again, what naming convention should I use? Probably you remember a lot Windows Service Packs or whatsoever. Microsoft isn't really understanding how versioning works, really. If Microsoft cannot do it, well, you probably can do it better, probably. This is not a joke. There is a product called Exchange Server 2010, update rollup 27 with Service Pack 3. I understand how you feel right now, but probably Microsoft back then didn't really know how to achieve it. So I guess we can start from there and make it better. But there are also a lot of things that you need to take care of. So for example, NuGet dependencies, should these things be versioned in the same way? Assembly version does not support semantic versioning. What should I consider a breaking change? There are all these topics that are quite difficult to understand, but you need to make it perfect or at least start onto something. And is there really a solution? In my opinion, there is not. It really depends on what you're doing, but I would suggest to start from semantic versioning. And Microsoft has also some guidelines where you can get started. So please check out that link that I added into the slides. Slides and recording of the videos will be available on YouTube 14 days after the event. So you will be able to check that out and be sure you start with the right tools. I can tell you what we did, which is using Git Flow and Git version. Git Flow is a branching strategy. This is quite known. This is based on the master branch and develop branch. Right now, actually, we renamed master into main because of the Black Lives Matter movement and so on. So we really stand on that, and we wanted to apply this change. But basically, what Git Flow and Git version are doing is that if you respect some naming convention, then using Git version, the system will be able to automatically calculate the version number for you using semantic versioning. This is based on numbers that you apply as tag, for example, to the number of commits that you are doing on a specific branch, on the number of merge, on the branch you're in, and so on. But if you look at the documentation, you will understand easily how these things are working. The only thing missing to have everything automated is to understand what is a breaking change. And in this case, I don't think you can find a tool that really understands what is a breaking change. You need someone specific in the team that is working on a specific feature to understand if they're doing a breaking change or not. And if they're doing, well, you can simply create a commit with plus somewhere breaking, and the version number will be increased. The major version number will be increased. How do I do that in the pipeline? Well, it's quite easy. You install the extensions from the marketplace. This is called Git version. So you first take the extension in, you modify the pipeline, you add the Git version task, and then if you want, you can also add another task to sign in your assemblies or whatever configuration file you may have so that your product is distributed with that specific version you're just calculating. Be sure to also add fallback values. So you may see on top of the image here a step called pre-calculate default version number. This is because if you have many long-living branches, then it will be very hard probably to calculate that, and it will have some timeouts. So the task may fail in some specific scenarios, but please, you need to check that so that you don't distribute DLLs with version 1.0 in production, like I did. And then, of course, we could be discussing about security. This is another important topic. We need to understand, because we deploy more and more software with more and more dependencies, third-party dependencies. Most of those things are open source, which can be it can be a way to say that we have high quality of the product because we have access to the source code if it is open source. But most of the times, these are also importing other third-party dependencies, which may be private, or you may never know where they come from, or what is the source code actually doing in there. So you need some security scanning to ensure the quality of the product that you are building and delivering to your customer. So there is a product called White Source Vault, which supports more than 200 languages. So this is simply a task, an extension again from the marketplace you can take in and you add it to your pipeline. There is a free version of it, so you can simply scan the code 5 times per day on both private and public repositories. If you want to pay, you have no limits, of course, but you will have a list of vulnerabilities listed in the summary of the build. So this is a good starting point, but the bonus point, I would say that you can export it to your managers as well. So you can take a PDF and send the PDF via email to your managers. But if you really want to take this one step forward, I would suggest to take a look at the report that these things is generating. So this is not the only tool, but this is the one that I'm recommending based on my experience. If you look at the security vulnerability report, you will see also suggestion on how to fix some specific version that has a public vulnerability. So most of the times it's just, hey, there is a new version available, you need to upgrade to that version. So in my opinion, you should be able to create a pipeline that parse the report and if there is a new version available and this is the recommendation, then takes the recommendation and applies the things into your repository, creating a new request so that you need just to have an approval from one of your team members, and most of the hard work is done, and it is completely automated end to end. Of course, security scanning is not only for third-party packages, but also for containers. So if you need something specific for containers, you can check, for example, Aqua Scanner. This is really useful if you need to be compliant with GDPR or something like that, and you don't really know all the layers of the Docker container you are creating, where it comes from. Again, there is a free plan, CSP, Paperscan, or something like that. This is also delivered as a Docker container, so it's really easy to use. But again, it depends on your expectations and on your product that you're building. So I will not dig into it too much. Then in the end, product managers. This is the probably most complicated part. And given it really depends on the product, I will not tell you the entire story on how we migrated to CI and CD pipelines. I can just tell you that we had some bottlenecks when switching to YAML pipelines. And the first one was that we were using SQL, and we were used to migrate the schema manually on the product and all the customers because we were afraid of having changes applied somewhere and losing data, of course, which is the highest priority for everyone. So we said, okay, what can we do with that? We need to automate it in some way. So we said, okay, let's start creating a replica. We do not care about cost in Azure. We spend hundreds of euros per month. So creating a replica during a deployment, we don't care. We do not care about time because we need to migrate data. So it will take a few minutes depending on how big the database is. But yeah, we don't care about it either. We care about data. So we create a replica, we try to update the schema on the replica, and then if there is success, we're able to migrate data, then okay, we swap the replica with the main database and we're done. Otherwise, if there is a failure, we still involve the team. So we're not 100% sure that this is the best process. We are still investigating what to do with it, but I think we are on the right track. But probably in next year or so, I will be able to tell you what's the end of the story regarding SQL. Then I would like to share something about stakeholders, which is, again, a different level of management because they are the one looking for the product. So they want to understand what's really happening in production so that customers have a very good environment that works as expected all the time. So when you look at feedback and monitoring, you need to understand that there isn't just monitoring in production. You need to have telemetry, you need to have testing in production, and fault injection. Fault injection is really complicated because it means that you are, for example, shutting down the SQL database, and you should see all the recovery procedures starting, meaning that probably a new database is created automatically. We are changing the master with the replica or something like that, and all the services up and running all the time. We all know this is really hard to achieve, so I will not talk about that. Telemetry is probably the easiest one because this is the one we are probably most used to, but I will show you in a moment testing in production because it's quite interesting. Before reaching that, I would like to share with you the bottleneck that we had, because when we started looking into the deployment phase, we said, okay, we need to have approvals. And approvals are great because it means that we have a go or no go from business side on whether to deploy to customers or not. But what about feature flags? I mean, we have look at all the code that we had in the past in the POC. We wrote it using best practices for DevOps, and we have feature flags. Why stopping the production deployment? What if I need to deploy faster and faster every single day? I cannot wait for approval from business because approval for business comes probably once per month, but I need to deploy multiple times per day. And does this really mean that if we have a go from business, then the product works as we expect to? Are we reducing the number of bugs? Well, long story short, no, this is not the case. So we said, okay, let's try to remove the approvals for now, and let's use release gates. Release gates are a way to ensure we're ready to release, but in an automated way. For example, we can say the deployment can start when the backlog is empty or there are no reported issue for that specific sprint. And then maybe that, I don't know, we require external approval via Azure Functions, you can do that. Or maybe when application insights report that the infrastructure is live, is healthy, that the software works in the previous staging slot for app services, for example. Or maybe that you do not have any issue reported into ServiceNow, or maybe that your KPI or Net Promoter Score are good enough for that deployment, so you can deploy into the new staging slot and promote the release. So this can also work with approvals if you need to, but this is already a good starting point. You have numbers that will tell you if you can proceed with the deployment or not. So great starting point. How are these things working? Well, this is a sampling on a time-based window. So for example, every 5 minutes, Azure DevOps is pinging one of the release gates that you have, and it will simply tell, hey, I'm passing the gate or not. And after n failures, then the deployment will stop. And of course, on the other side, after several success gates, then deployment will start for that specific environment. But does this mean really that we are doing qualitative, we are ensuring the quality of the product that we are releasing? Of course not. You need something different. So in this case, we split the rollout during this A/B testing, maybe, or testing in production, as you want to call it, or partial rollouts, as I prefer to call it, which is I'm doing the deployments into a staging slot into my app services for the customer. And I'm just giving to that specific staging slot a percentage of network traffic, in this case 10%, which means that at the same time in production I have 90% of the customers or the network calls going into the real production environment, and 10% of those network requests going into my new deployment. Let's call it V2. And then what happens? Well, if everything works, I can increase the staging traffic from 10 to 20, from 20 to 50, and maybe from 50 to 100. And once all the deployment is completed, well, you have the newer version running in production. Otherwise, in the meantime, you can use release gates to understand via application insight if you have issues reported into the new staging slot. If there are issues, you can simply stop the deployment. And you have the entire process with maybe rollback applied automatically. So this is really cool. And then, of course, I have only 2 minutes left, but I would like to talk about real managers, the one wearing suits. So I have added a unicorn here because they want things that usually do not exist, like time and budget. But I would like to show you what we did for those people just to make their life easier. So first of all, we have created a lot of queries, you remember. So we created dashboards for it. So we have an entry point where they can connect and see how many bugs we have, how many work items are in progress, what are the team members, what we're working on next, what are the state of activities right now, quick links to start working on something. And then we added other dashboards of different types. These are probably less manager style, but probably if you are a product owner, you are interested in that as well, because in this case, build analytics are useful to understand how many agents I'm using all the time, and if I need to buy more agents. These are always related to time and money that I'm spending on Azure DevOps. Each agent will cost me some money, so I need to be very careful. And the same thing applies to tests as well. So again, please run all the tests as much as you can. So whenever you do a new deployment, make sure to run all the tests, but maybe not all the test suites that you have, just the tests that are impacted by the changes that you are doing. And one of the things that are useful when you have these data is to identify flaky tests, the one that are passing one time and failing the other one. So yeah, It may be caused due to an issue that you have in your code base, but most of the time it is on something that, well, it is not your fault. And then we also created custom dashboards for it. So we said, okay, given our solution is a single tenant and we deploy the same solution for multiple customers, we need to understand which customer is running which version. So we have endpoints in our APIs, we have versioning in our DLLs. So we created a website. We created an internal website where we said, okay, this is the list of customers. These are the version deployed in QA and production. This is pinging Azure DevOps and all the release management REST APIs in order to have these dashboards. And then the same dashboard is not available on the web, but it is available within Azure DevOps via an extension. So if you want to look at some metrics, again, the entire flow is within Azure DevOps. You don't need to get out. But if you really do want to do something cool with your managers, you can create Power BI reports. Again, there is all the analytics dashboard that you can use from Azure DevOps, where you have a set of queries that are predefined. But if you look in GitHub, there is the Flowwiz chart already available, where you can download several pages of Power BI reports based on your workflow. You can set things up in minutes, literally. You can create custom dashboards for your manager and export them to your managers really in less than a day. So this is amazing. And in the end, I want to talk about documentation, because documentation is really the pain point, I guess, for everyone, not only for managers, because they want to understand how things are going, but also they want to understand, for example, the release notes, sprint summaries, PI summaries, or whatsoever. They want to be sure that they have enough capacity to manage all the things that we have. Again, if you need something more, then you need to buy something. So if you have a report for it, your managers will be happy. So I guess this is all for my session. So I wanted to thank you all. I want to say, please do fail, learn how to fail like I did, so that you can automate all the things that you have. And don't forget to add unicorns and lots of colors in the reports that you are making in PDF to your managers. So this is me, Matteo Tumiati. Please, let's continue to have the conversation offline. I will be more than happy to reply to all of the questions you may have. So thank you very much, Scottish Summit, and thank you all. Wish you all a happy afternoon.